Welcome to today's ALA Solution Series webcast. 2026 Vision, Driving Profitable Change with AI, Client Experience, and Data. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to introduce our webinar sponsor, Clio. Clio is the world's leading provider of cloud-based technology, trusted by 200,000 legal professionals in 130 plus countries. As the industry's only end-to-end software solution, Clio centralizes client intake, case management, document automation, payments, accounting, and more, powered by AI on its unified platform. Recognized by all 50 U.S. state bars, Clio has the most five-star reviews of any legal practice management. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat box for everyone now. If you'd like more information, you can visit this link. And we are joined today by Kate Bell. She introduced herself earlier. Welcome, Kate. We are looking forward to hearing all about what you have to share with us today, and you can go ahead and take it from here.
Thanks so much, Joy. And welcome, everyone. Thank you, especially again to Joy and the ALA for hosting this solution series. My name is Kate Bell. I am a former legal administrator, and I know the unique pressures that a lot of us face balancing the business of law with the practice of law. So today, I'm really excited to talk through together some of the trends we've seen over the last couple of years and some practical tips that might help make your existing team more effective with all the tools and insights that drive real results for 2026 planning. Here at Clio, we are in the middle of lots of 2026 planning, as I'm sure many of you are, with the new year just right around the corner. So this really is the perfect time for this conversation. First, again, my name is Kate. I've been with Clio for a couple of years now, but I'm also a former legal administrator. So this is a really special group to me. And I love having conversations like this with my people. So my perspective today is grounded in almost a decade of legal tech experience, helping firms maybe like yours navigate everything from rolling out new tech to cash flow issues and cash crunches. And currently here at Clio, I'm uniquely positioned to see real-time data that drives a lot of firm success across our industry. So that's what we'll talk about today. And I'm super excited to be here. While we kick off this conversation, like Joy mentioned, we can utilize this platform that we're all on right now today to connect with one another. So I want to take a quick moment to test this out. Using that chat box that Joy mentioned just a minute ago, drop where you're joining us from and one goal that you have for 2026. I'm going to do the same so we can all do it together. I'm joining you from Atlanta, where it's actually very cold right now. And I'm really looking forward to integrating even more AI into some of our most tedious administrative processes in 2026. So I'm hoping that you'll be brave and you'll share where you're joining from and some exciting goals you have for the new year. While those are coming in, here's our roadmap for the next few minutes. By few, I mean close to an hour. So grab a cup of coffee and make sure you're comfortable. First, we'll start with the data, diving into those key trends I mentioned from this year and how we can actually use them to define a profitable 2026 plan. The core of our session is going to focus on the most difficult part, that change management piece, which is really scary. So we'll walk through how you can provide a framework for creating that critical buy-in across the firm. And then we'll look at what sustaining success looks like with key metrics and walk away with some concrete next steps. When we look at the efficiencies of law firms, we look into where law firms are really spending their time and where they're investing their resources. To do this at Clio, we actually take a data-driven approach using our Legal Trends Report. So over the course of 10 years, the Legal Trends Report has provided insight into the practice of law that just never existed before. The reason for this is actually the source of the data. So this report uses Clio's app data, and I'll be really specific here in saying that this is not sensitive or confidential information. This is aggregated and anonymized data from thousands of legal professionals that use Clio. We supplement that with over 1,700 survey responses from legal professionals across the industry. And we also add in consumer surveys so we can get a nice perspective from those who are actually looking for legal services, not just those providing the service. This year, we also added something a little extra special, and we ran our first neurological study. I won't get into this today, but it really is truly fascinating to see how all of this technology and change affects our brains. So if you're interested, I encourage you to download a copy of that report because it is a really cool and quick read. So to help us decide where you can stay ahead or where you want to focus your energy heading into the new year, we will start with some of those learnings and insights into those key trends from the last couple of years, especially in 2025. So each year we release the newest copy of the Legal Trends Report as an in-depth examination into the state of legal practice. And the reason that we developed this report at all was to help legal professionals actually ground their decisions in data. So whether you've been in the business for decades or you're just starting out at your practice, folks rely on this legal trends report to support their firm operations. So we will run through the top 3 trends and takeaways from 2025 to give you some inspiration and ground those goals in data for 2026 planning. Like I said, the report is completely free to download, so you can scan this QR code here, or Joy will also drop it in the chat. And I encourage you to do so because I will really, truly only be scratching the surface today, and there's a lot more insights to help guide your 2026 law firm and team strategy. We have to start the conversation with AI. Like so many other topics and trends coming out of the last couple of years, AI is absolutely dominating. So we know that AI adoption in legal is high, but it's actually higher than other general professional services provided. So for us as administrators, especially, the conversation around AI is not if we focus our investment on AI. Now it's where and when should we focus our investment, especially for the greatest return when it comes to artificial intelligence. What we found is that almost all mid-size law firms have adopted AI in some capacity, and at least half, 51%, have actually adopted AI widely or universally. So they are using it in most of their processes and using it when available, where available across the team, not just partial adoption or some adoption. And just to provide some definitions here, you'll hear me say mid-sized law firms throughout, and we define that as more than 20 attorneys in a law firm. And compared to other professional services, AI adoption among legal professionals still remains high, which I think is really interesting because legal is actually leading the way with this technology adoption, which we don't do very often. So it's something that excites me. And this new era for us, given our slow adopter reputation, is really exciting to see how we can see the biggest returns from adopting AI. So if your firm is maybe on the slower side of adoption, some of these results from other professional services industries can help, like I said, ground that buy-in. If AI is on the roadmap for 2026, here's how we're ranking among those other professional services across the nation, right? And here's how other mid-size or even solo small firm, the medium-sized law firms are already adopting. So are we behind at this point? In our longitudinal study, we looked at growing, stable, and shrinking firms over a 5-year period. And we found that growing firms, those with revenue that has grown more than 20%, are actually using AI 113% more than stable firms. Stable firms don't fall into that revenue growth exceeding 20%, but the revenue is also not shrinking. So it's staying stable. And those shrinking firms are where revenue is shrinking at more than 20% year over year. So stable firms are using AI 96% more than shrinking firms. So if growth and AI adoption and integration is part of your 2026 plan, it's really time to consider AI and how you might be investing in your current processes and with your current tools. I saw a couple of people mention AI when I asked earlier in the chat about your 2026 plans. So these stats are really important to take back to the firm when we're talking about developing that buy-in and why this is important and why this is the right time. So taking this a step further, if responsibly integrating AI more deeply into the processes of your firm is on your 2026 roadmap, like I know it is for at least a handful of us today, we've found that almost 70% of wide adopters of AI are reporting positive revenue impact, almost double that of firms with partial or minimal adoption. So this is really great if expanding your firm's revenue or cash flow is also critical to 2026 plans. So let's go ahead and we'll talk about some of these benefits that these law firms have reported on, especially in that mid-sized space when it comes to adopting and integrating AI in 2025. But maybe drop in the chat, how have you already started implementing AI this year? And we'll use that as a place where we can build off of it in the next year. One thing that we've started this year here at Clio is we've been using AI to help us craft new copy ideas, especially for like emails. And that's been really, really successful in saving us time during such an administrative task that is critical to the business, but really helping us start with a really good draft where we can then put in our personal and human touch. So that content creation piece has been extremely valuable. So other firms reporting the benefits of AI and what they're seeing right now. So these are reported by the 92% of legal professionals that have adopted AI in some way over the last year. That highest benefit that you see there is improved work quality, 65%. We also see better client responsiveness, increased work capacity, increased productivity, improved client satisfaction, reduced operational costs, increased competitiveness. And all of these benefits are signals that AI is a tool to help us become more effective and impactful with the teams that we already have. So I'm going to take a second here because we could also spend another 60 minutes on the risks, the limitations, and the ethics of AI. I don't have time to do that today. Joy would kill me, but I highly encourage you to please do your research about what's best for your team and what's best for your clients when it comes to responsibly incorporating AI into any aspect of your firm. Our second growth driver here is the optimized client experience, or CX, as you might hear it called in different areas of the profession. So today's clients expect legal services to be super convenient, very transparent, and responsive as any other service they use. CX and an optimized client experience is no longer a soft skill. It's an operational imperative for growing law firms. In 2019, we actually ran a secret shopper experiment looking for legal services across 1,000 firms in the US. What we found back in 2019 is that on average, law firms were really, really struggling to provide a great client, especially potential new client experience. Over half our shoppers' emails and phone calls went entirely unanswered. So we wanted to try this again last year in 2024 and see over the last 5 years, had we made any impact in this client experience realm of the business. Unfortunately, when we ran this experiment again last year, we asked another 1,000 firms across the US. 73% of our secret shoppers were unlikely to recommend the law firms with whom they communicated due to lack of responsiveness, unclear next steps, unclear or not transparent pricing, and poor customer service. So today, and especially into next year, what are firms doing to address this client experience issue, especially for our pipeline or our potential new clients? Well, we're actually seeing that growing law firms compared against that stable law firm and shrinking law firm, growing law firms report being more focused on this client experience problem with the use of CX technology. So these features are both time saving and labor saving, but they also increase that first impression that someone has with your law firm and the experience of working with your law firm throughout the retention of their matter. Those things involve email scheduling, client intake CRM, document automation, electronic payments, chatbots on a website. In each of those categories, it's these growing firms in green that lead in adoption rates, implying that a good customer experience is also a key to that revenue growth. Growing firms are also considering the client experience the most when it comes to purchasing new technology. So when we're looking at what investments we need to make in the next couple of years, especially with 2026 planning, client experience technology is something where growing firms are spending time considering in their overall investment of new technology. And it's no surprise that a great customer experience drives faster conversions, timely payments, reduced lockup, repeat clients and services, great reviews, and more referrals, right? Our third driver here is foundational, data-driven decisions. Sometimes the biggest opportunity for growth often lies in not actually finding net new clients altogether, although, of course, that is extremely important, but it's actually in capturing the revenue that you've already earned. So we all know that what gets measured gets managed. So you must know your lawyer funnel metrics and law firm key performance indicators, or KPIs, as they're commonly addressed. This is especially important for goal setting and tracking, as we'll discuss in a few minutes. So I want to look at some key performance indicators first. And a lot of you are probably already familiar with this, but bear with me. So utilization rate is the number of hours worked out of the number of hours in a workday. On average, in our legal trends report, lawyers and legal professionals tell us that they work an 8-hour day. I know for a lot of folks, we're working more than 8 hours, which maybe we shouldn't be, but on average, folks are telling us they've got 8 hours committed in a workday. So that's what we'll use. The realization rate is the number of hours worked in that 8 hours that actually make it onto a bill. So why hours might not make it onto a bill, maybe a partner decided it shouldn't have taken so long, or maybe we discounted for a couple of hours, whatever it needed to be. That undercutting happens when we're talking about hours worked versus hours that make it on a bill. The last one here is collection rate. So the collection rate is the number of hours that actually made it on the bill and that actually made it into the law firm's operating account. So the hours paid by the client. This is really your bottom line revenue. Using the utilization rate, the realization rate, and the collection rate is a really powerful way to see what aspects or areas of your firm can really drive the most impact when it comes to 2026 planning and goals for the overall long-term health of your law firm. If you're not already tracking this utilization rate, realization rate, and collection rate, this is where I would recommend that you get started so that you can ground the rest of your decision-making about your law firm in data that impacts the health and revenue of the firm. Now, the lawyer's funnel is a really easy way to visualize how these key performance indicators that we just looked at impact your revenue. So if you're like me, I'm more of a visual person, less of a math person. So this is easier for me to understand and visualize this impact here. And you'll notice we call it the funnel because it starts larger at the top, shrinks in the middle, and gets smaller at the bottom. So a notable improvement, this is from 2016, 10 years ago, almost. And in 2016, the average lawyer was only getting paid for about 1.5 hours or 18% of their workday, which is really scary because I know our lawyers are working way more than that, but we had those hours missing. In 2025, the average lawyer is getting paid for 2.4 hours or 30% of their workday, which is a 60% increase in potential revenue. Some of these missing hours, now our funnel is getting a little less dramatic, but there's still that gap in between. And some of that is just due to the kind of work that we have to get done during the day as legal professionals. So some of our CFOs, if any of you are in the room, or our partners might think otherwise, but typically legal staff can't spend every single minute of the day billing. There are certain administrative tasks that have to get done that eats into those total hours utilized, right? That's where technology comes in as one of the most powerful features and technologies to give you back that time and increase that revenue. So we've seen those improvements across our key performance indicators in our lawyer funnels over the last couple of years. Another year-over-year figure that we publish is the Legal Productivity Index. So this actually examines individual workload, billing, and revenue growth rates. I promise we will stop talking about numbers and graphs in just a few minutes, but bear with me because this is super important. So if you're anything like me, you are looking at this slide and you're like, what is Kate doing? I did not get into legal to interpret graphs and percentages, but maybe you did because you're a legal administrator. And here's the gist of what I would like for you to take away from this slide. Year over year, we've seen a lot of really positive changes in productivity. The number of total matters or cases represented per lawyer is up almost 20% year over year. The number of hours recorded is up by 30%. The amounts billed is up by 22%, and amounts collected is up by 21% year over year. These are all indicators that as an industry, we're moving in the right direction and we're making our law firms more efficient. And you can see the steep curve starting after 2020, 2021, where that post-COVID world and the proliferation of AI and automation has really, really launched our law firms into this tech-forward future where we're capable of expanding what's possible with the teams that we already have. So with this increased productivity, what have been the 2025 approaches to taking on more cases, right? A lot of law firms ask, how can we do more with what we already have? So when we look at matter volume for growing law firms, we see some different approaches. If you take a look on the left side of this graph, the average solo lawyer took on 38 new matters last year. The average growing solo has 52 matters, a 37% increase over the industry average. Those growing small boutique firms see matters jump from 56 to 70 matters per responsible lawyer on average. And these growing firms are taking more of a vertical approach to growth, building up the capacity of every single team member to take on more cases. On the other side of this graph, those larger firms and mid-sized law firms see overall less growth in matters per responsible lawyer, probably because these firms are more likely to use hiring to keep those workloads consistent, and the workloads of the teams that they already have are already optimized. So there's not a lot of additional capacity that can be really expanded there because they've already got the investment and the resources to do that. This is more of a horizontal approach to growth. Rather than building up that team capacity, since that's already optimized, these firms are adding in those new team members to address headcount and caseload. Now, when looking at changes in revenue, this is really interesting. Per responsible lawyer, we kind of see the inverse. So we reviewed matters open from 2016 to 2023. You're asking why not 2024? Surprisingly, a lot of the matters that were still open in 2024 were still receiving payments. So we excluded them so we could have a more accurate picture of what these gains look like. And in the larger firms and mid-sized law firms, we saw the most growth in revenue per responsible lawyer. Now, of course, some of this is the complexity of matters handled by these larger firms, and the larger increases in hourly rates may also increase or account for part of this increase, excuse me. The takeaway from this section here, I know that was a lot of numbers, a lot of graphs. The most successful firms are sustaining their growth by increasing the impact of the people that they have. We can't gauge that impact unless we're measuring performance through those key performance indicators and those other firm metrics that you'll start to track at your firm. So if, let's say, part of your goal was implementing AI in 2026, I would back that up with, because I want to see an X% increase in my firm lockup, which we'll talk about in a minute, or in the number of matters that each of my attorneys takes on in 2026, something like that, right? Now, before we leave this section, I also want to talk about law firm lockup, because this is really, really important when it comes to the cash flow of a firm. And that new matter growth, billing, and collection growth are all really great, but the timing of getting paid is also crucial for law firms. So the last KPI that we'll round out this section with is what we call law firm lockup. And that measures how much of a firm's revenue, just like it sounds, is locked up, either in an unbilled or an uncollected state. So lockup is expressed in the number of days against your annual revenue. We've got 3 types of lockup. So realization lockup at the top here is the time that completed work goes unbilled. So the work has been completed. It's sitting in your Clio account as unbilled time, ready for your finance clerk or your billing specialist or whoever it is to generate those draft bills, have them reviewed and approved by your attorney, go back to the billing clerk or financial specialist, back to the attorney one more time, maybe escalate it up to the partner for review, and then it finally makes it onto an actual bill going out to the client, right? We've all been there. Collection lockup in the middle is the time it actually takes for bills to get paid. What I will also say here is if the time it takes for your bills to get paid is around this median collection lockup or even longer, more than 32 days, electronic billing should be on your 2026 roadmap if it's not already. So that brings us to total lockup, which is the median law firm's cash flow between your realization and your collection, all the way down till it gets back into your operating account. Median total lockup across the industry in this last year is 93 days. So the median law firm's cash flow is always 3 months behind. Some firms might be doing much better than this. Some might be right around this, and some might be doing worse. So this is a really interesting industry benchmark to track against, especially if one of your goals was around AI, because this is a place that AI can absolutely help improve that lockup total. So this brings us to this key to success here when it comes to bridging the gap from inspiration to action. I've got all of this awesome data backed up by real legal professionals, real consumers looking for legal services across the industry. But the key to success here is strategy and understanding why change can fail and why it can be so hard to implement, especially for us as legal administrators when we are constantly up against competing priorities in the firm, resistance to change as an industry standard, and oftentimes unclear paths forward. So as we start this next section, I would love for at least a couple people to drop in the chat what comes up for you when you think about implementing change. And I'm going to add it too. We'll just take a second and I'm going to ask you to come back to this. So really take a second, think about change, how it feels to you, and drop it in the chat. For me, it's excitement and a little bit of reasonable hesitation, but mostly excitement. Scary yet exciting, pushback from attorneys. Awesome. Yep. Keep those coming. And there's good reason that change feels so hard, especially for legal professionals. Legal can still be a really antiquated industry, which is actually by design and how we as legal professionals are trained to manage risk. Law firms, especially more established firms, are really prone to resisting disruption in what they've already had working for X number of years, right? And I hear some common pain points with specific regards to technology or workflow updates, especially as I see some of us are looking at AI for 2026. Some top 3 reasons for resistance are comfort with the status quo. We've been doing this for 20 years. It hasn't failed us so far, so let's not change. But it probably is failing you. Fear of failure or adding work to people's already busy plates. Poor communication from leadership, especially if we're dealing with change-resistant attorneys, partners, or managers. And I'm going to add one more here because bad experiences with change, especially after COVID, when so many law firms were suddenly faced with no choice but to figure out how to adapt, that change and that introduction to technology, on average, didn't go well. And we are just now kind of getting into the swing of understanding what processes really work, what tools we really trust, things like that. So bad experiences with change is also a huge reason for resistance. So I actually find this comforting. We hear about stages of anger, stages of grief. There are also similar stages of change. And these should feel familiar as legal administrators because we do this all the time. From initial shock, hey, I think we should explore flat fee billing when we've been hourly billing for the past 30 years. Shock, right? To anger, to acceptance. That's the hope, right? That it goes that smoothly. But how do we successfully navigate all the stages in between, especially with large teams, multiple offices, a lot of stakeholders, and a lot of people, right? With limited resources. What I find really comforting about this change curve is that we often think about implementing change as a linear experience, especially from at least my legal administrator brain. I often say, okay, I can see the path forward. I know what we need to make it happen. I know how to make it successful. And then people don't think like I think. So then it becomes this challenge, right? But understanding that change is more of a curve that is not linear helps to manage some of those expectations, and that when you're in that anger, denial, and depression stage, that's part of the process, right? So change management. People dedicate their entire careers to perfecting this approach to this whole industry called change management. There are professional certifications, books, courses, all aimed at defining this concept, which at its core is most simply a structured approach to shifting individuals, teams, and organizations from a current state to a desired future state. We do this as humans already, all the time. If you're a parent in this group, if you're a sibling, if we're employees, we have to adjust to different people, different processes all the time. And law firm administrators especially quickly become the masters at change management when it's done successfully. And I often feel that the persona of the legal administrator, I might be biased, but is actually the person who is uniquely positioned to implement change, because you usually have the closest pulse on what's going on in the firm, who needs to make which decisions, what we need to anticipate, that kind of thing, right? So I wanted to give you an actual model and framework that you could take back to your 2026 planning to provide some structure and kind of ground the next steps. So instead of saying, like I said, I want to implement more AI in my processes in 2026, this gives us a model for how I can actually think about that change in a much more structured way for better success. There are a lot of different methodologies about change management and how to best implement change, but I really like this is called the ADKAR model because it focuses on the human first approach to change, which I find is already a naturally baked in superpower to legal administrators because we have to approach so many situations in our law firm with the human first. So this ADKAR model is 5 elements of successful change awareness. We start at awareness, understanding why the change is needed. So people have to realize in the firm that this change is happening. Here's why it matters for your firm, for their clients, and for their own roles. Defining that will help them be invited along in the process and create that buy-in. Next is desire, having the motivation to actually support the change. It's not enough to just have the awareness and to know the why. People want to actually be part of it and have that desire to join you in the change. So this comes from really clear communication, especially top down, starting with that leadership support, and then showing those quick wins through personal benefits. You should desire to be part of this change because it's going to save you 10 hours in our monthly billing process when you don't have to manually process every single one of those bills, right? Just as an example. Knowledge in the middle here is knowing how to change. So that includes what do we need for training, guidance, what resources do we need in place so that people understand what exactly is expected of them during this process and how to adapt successfully. Ability is having the skills, the support, and the resources to actually successfully implement the change. I see a lot of firms get stuck on this ability piece because, especially when it comes to tech, I know that investment can be costly, but when we try to cut corners and use the tech in ways that doesn't successfully set every single person up for success who's relying on using this tool, we're cutting the ability for this to be a successful change. So once folks know how, why, and kind of when, what they need, all of that kind of support that comes before this ability stage, people also need the time, the tools, and the confidence to apply the change in those real work settings. And then the last one here is reinforcement. So sustaining the change over time. This means celebrating those quick wins, measuring progress through those KPIs, and ensuring that that new way becomes the normal way, not just this huge one-time effort. So this model is actually scalable and can be applied to future firm growth and how we're implementing change beyond 2026. So whether you're rolling out AI tools, a new CRM for increased customer experience, or maybe it's even an AI policy, a time off policy, whatever it is, this change management model can be really helpful in grounding the approach to implementing that change. I was just going to say, just as Joy mentioned in the chat, I know this is a lot of information, so we will definitely have time at the end for questions. Keep them in the chat so that we can keep an eye on those, and we'll make sure to answer all of them, or as many of them as we can live. So I wanted to give a quick example of when change can fail. And maybe you're luckier than I was, but some of you may have had a similar experience. I think I saw some at least someone from Durham, North Carolina. There might be some other North Carolina representatives here in the chat, but this quick story takes place in the beautiful Chapel Hill, yep, at the Old Well on UNC's campus. It's March of 2020. This is where my nonprofit law firm was. So March of 2020, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, beautiful UNC, go Tar Heels. Suddenly, our office is mandated to work from home, and we hard launched into the world of Zoom, Teams, WebEx. We were trying to figure out all of it. The list went on and on and on of all the tools we suddenly had to start using. Y'all, we weren't even set up to run our weekly meeting virtually or take phone calls without our VoIP system on our hardline phones on everybody's desk. I mean, all of our files were paper files in 2020. So we had a big problem and we needed to figure out how to manage that change really, really quickly. Obviously, given the title of this slide, that change failed, but I think it's important to say why. So it became my job to get our team set up and adapted to a virtual conferencing platform as soon as possible, basically in the blink of an eye. I cannot tell you how terrible that first Teams call went. Half the team couldn't log into their account because they didn't have the appropriate licenses. The other half was so frustrated trying to figure out how to turn on their cameras and unmute themselves for the first times that they left the call. It was a complete failure. Like, it couldn't have gone any worse. Now, when I look back at that situation 6 years ago, and I look at the ad car model that I just mentioned, I will say that a few things were successful, even given such an overall failure. I did really well understanding and explaining why this change was needed and why it needed to happen immediately. We were not going to be able to go into our office as usual, as normal. We literally were not allowed. So we had to figure out a virtual platform where we could continue our business operations. And it had to be done immediately because we had clients counting on us. So that was clearly understood and explained. The firm had a unanimous motivation, which is that desire piece to attempt this change. So I had some buy-in. But here's where everything else went so poorly. I knew how we were going to make this change. We were all going to get on Teams. We were going to start there as our online virtual conferencing platform. But nobody else knew how that was going to happen. And I didn't tell them beforehand. I assumed the ability of my team to log into Teams, to get their license from campus, to, know how to mute and unmute and turn on their cameras. I assumed, and I did not properly enable. The reinforcement piece was completely lost in the urgency of this change. So it was just never going to be sustainable, right? The outcome of all of that was low adoption, some wasted budget, because then everybody hated Teams from that point on going forward forever, and frustration across the team, right? So the lesson was that lack of planning, even though it was unprecedented times, equaled resistance and some resentment. So even really great ideas that have the desire piece, the awareness piece, can flop without the rest of the model. Okay, I'm going to share a success story as well, too, so that we can have the other side of this. But remember when I asked you about one goal you had for 2026 about 44 minutes ago? If you didn't get to share it earlier, I would love for you to drop in the chat now and think about, share that goal if you haven't already shared it for 2026. If you already shared, think about that goal again as we talk about how to actually turn that piece into an actionable step forward. Okay. So turning goals into action, just like I said, doesn't happen overnight. And if it does, it's probably going to fail like I did. But I've had lots of successes since then. So we learn from our failures. It has to be intentional, grounded in something like the ad car model for change management, Here is my recipe for implementing change at a beginner's level: engaging early and often, communicating with intention, creating those quick wins, using the technology the way it's intended, measuring what really matters, and using a framework for action. So, some examples: involving people who others listen to and involving them early is really, really powerful. So, identify the champions across your departments, not just by title. If you have someone who is your intake specialist and they are converting the most pipeline or the most potential new clients than anybody else, and we've got something that can make their job even easier so they can maximize the value of their pipeline, let's go ahead and identify that champion and see if they would be willing to create that desire and buy-in for implementing this change with AI powered CRM software so we can make our intake process twice as fast, right? This reduces fear and builds that ownership of the change across multiple touch points in the firm. Over communicating. So people generally tune out to generic updates. I get a lot of monthly emails, monthly Slack updates, all these types of things. Unless there's something, critical that I need to know, I will skim and glance. Otherwise, I'm going to be a little bit tuned out because I got a million other things to focus on. So make these messages really specific. Instead of saying, we're going to add AI tools in 2026, say, this AI tool is going to reduce your time spent reviewing documents by 30%. Actionable insight that creates buy-in right away and generates a quick win. What do other quick wins look like? So quick wins also quiet skeptics in the firm. So especially important if you're faced with a lot of resistance, these small wins that you can clearly identify build huge momentum when it comes to getting people on board. So even if it's just automating one small task with an AI tool, when people see that quick value, they're more open to making a bigger change. Okay, well, this helped me save 10 hours on my billing process at the end of the month. What would that mean for quarterly billing reports or three-way trust reconciliation? Like all those things, it makes people more open-minded for bigger gains with more change and more technology. So if you can eliminate that archaic task that everyone hates, like chasing expense reports or manually tracking billable time using passive time capture, you've created that win that generates positive peer pressure. And reminder, like I said before, it's not just about buying the tool. When it comes to tech, it's about how you roll it out, how you train for it, and how you support adoption. The biggest pushback here is often fear of inaccuracy or liability, especially for us legal professionals. So position this tech as an assistant, not as a replacement, especially if it's AI. Provide those real world examples that we just talked about, like mid-sized firms are using AI for document summarization to save up to 80% of research time. Are we part of that? The pool of firms, the 51% of mid-sized firms that are widely using AI, because these are the types of results that we could see, right? I also, on this slide, take 1 second. There's one thing not listed on this list. And when we're introducing new tech and new tools, there can often be an unspoken resistance that is just based on ability. I even face this. So, AI tools are changing literally every single day. It's nearly impossible to keep up with. And I see some of my younger siblings and nieces and nephews using all these crazy tools that I've never even heard of and that I'm so behind on. And I don't want to admit that I'm behind in that way or that I'm not tech forward. So sometimes starting from that human first approach of none of us are very familiar with this, but we have a really cool opportunity to get familiar and increase X in our law firm or make X experience better for our clients, that's what makes it worth it. And it makes it more approachable so that it's less, you need to get on board and learn this new tool that it's uncomfortable to admit you know nothing about. This goes back to our data-driven section. Again, what gets measured gets managed, and what gets celebrated gets repeated. So build simple check-ins to evaluate if this change is actually sticking and if it's making an impact in your key performance indicators. So some other metrics that you can track if it's not utilization, collection, realization, how many people have actually adopted the tool? How much time has it saved with the key group of people whose jobs it's impacting? What's the staff satisfaction using the tool? Revisit those results on a regular cadence. Some do it annually, some go quarterly. Create surveys, check-ins, if that would be helpful to make sure that the investment that you're actually putting in is making impact across the firm. So when you put it all together, you get something like this, and this is just an example. So let's say we're implementing a new time tracking system like Clio to reduce billing errors and time spent chasing down billable activity at the end of the month. I say Clio as a funny example, but this could be any tool that you already have or any other non-practice management related tool, right? Who should we invite to the conversation? In this example, probably our partners or those attorneys actually approving the bills so that that piece can get easier, associates and paralegals contributing to those billable activities. And then we should definitely be inviting Susan from finance and accounting, who has built her own system for the last 15 years, so that we can get her buy-in early. Outline those quick wins. This is going to save the practice 20 hours a month and increase our realization and collection rates by 30% and decrease our lockup days by 10 days. Draft a communication plan that brings people along while also facilitating feedback. This is super important, that feedback piece, so that you can get ahead of the questions that people have and make sure that you're inviting them to that conversation, creating that desire piece in the ADKAR model. So pick the person who this would be a most effective coming from. If it's your partner or CEO, CFO, have them explain the why to the entire firm. If it would be helpful, create a 15-minute recorded demo during your team meeting. Compile a frequently asked questions and quick benefits or quick wins sheet that you know people are probably going to ask so they can go ahead and see the immediate benefit and value. I also recommend, if you have the team and you have the capacity, create a skeptic test group to engage others and create buy-in. So get the people that you think are going to be the most skeptical of the change, have them test it out and run through all the different scenarios, questions, concerns, and then report back to the broader group with how it went if it was successful. And then define that success. So something like the percent of attorneys using the new billing tool within the first 2 weeks, reduction in billing cycle time after 30 days, reduction in collection time after 30 days. Another really successful campaign, I'll say here, if you've implemented change in the past and you have kind of gone through this process, and at the end here, you've invested all this time into making sure that the change is beneficial for the team, you've got the buy-in, and then nobody's using it because life happens, work happens, emergencies happen, and everybody is defaulting back to what they've done for forever. We've had some successful firms come back and do some really fun initiatives like having kind of like a raffle or like a race. So engaging people with incentives to say the first 20 people who use this tool consistently for the next week are going to get a $20 Starbucks gift card or whatever it is across the firm. But that kind of creates that urgency and it gamifies this challenge of getting people to actually interact with the change that you're trying to implement. So I promised that I would share the other side, which is a story of success when it comes to implementing change. And this was a huge change with one of our Clio customers, Koning and Dunn in Omaha, Nebraska. This is a mid-market customer or firm that shared their experience with change management during a webinar earlier this year with Clio. And here are some of the ways that they have embraced change successfully across their firm. So they've implemented all kinds of things from a whole new practice management software, being Clio, to different types of personnel changes, other types of billing changes. Some of the key factors to their success when we asked them, if you had to boil it down, what were some of the most successful things that drive change at your firm? And they said they create and invest in this culture of feedback. So they don't want anyone to be afraid when they need to share something that's not working. They have ideas about something, they have questions. They really invite this culture of feedback so that there is no fear in sharing how things are really going. They also invest in strong leadership. So their leadership team is involved in the decision making, but they're also not involved when they're the bottleneck on the decision. So they also invest and develop this sense of trust in the experts in their team, and they help create that buy-in, help make sure that this desire, awareness, and knowledge of what needs to be changed is coming from the top down as well. Building trust, again, as part of that investment in strong leadership and culture of feedback. They also start small. So they said they started with a focus group on a lot of their bigger changes, which really led them to be able to identify questions that were going to be frequently asked, concerns to get ahead of, what kind of bumps along the way are going to come up that if we can address them with a smaller group, will make it easier to distribute to the larger group. They also brought in that perspective of resistance. So their lead paralegal went straight to the person she knew was going to resist the change the most and started with that person to bring in that perspective of resistance and inform the rest of the strategy. And then lastly, they said they stayed creative and open-minded with all ideas. So as legal administrators, innovators, and leaders in our law firms, we do not always have to just wait for buy-in, because you're more likely to be waiting forever. And you are the expert at your firm. You have the closest pulse on what is going on, what changes need to be made, and who needs to be involved. So I invite you to, instead of wait, go ahead and find ways to build that buy-in. So I'll wrap up here. I know we only have a couple minutes, so I want to answer some questions if we've seen any of those come through. I encourage you to download the Legal Trends Report, that first half of today's session, which was grounded in so much data. There is so much more. And there's also that neurological study section, which is really interesting. And this is totally free to download, so you can scan that, or Joy has dropped it in the chat. We also have a guide to change management with lots of different tools and resources when it comes to different types of change in a law firm. So I would encourage you to check that out as well. And I also want to take a moment to talk a little bit about Clio. Clio is the operating system for law firms. What's unique about Clio is we help you manage both the business and the practice of law, truly changing the way that legal work gets done across your team. So here are some of our Clio offerings, and Joy is going to launch a poll. Let us know if you'd like to learn more about Clio products and how we might be able to help your firm. And if you're interested in learning more about any of our solutions, let me know. As members of the ALA, you get a lifetime 10% discount on Clio products. So scan this code, or Joy's also going to drop it in the chat if you're interested in learning more about that member benefit. And I'll go ahead and take some questions if I've got any in the chat. We've got maybe 59 seconds.
Yeah, I can get one asked here, Kate, and then leave it for you for closing remarks. But this question I have is you mentioned that 51% of mid-sized firms are adopting AI. From an administrative perspective, what is the single biggest pushback you anticipate receiving from your attorneys or partners when proposing a new AI tool?
Thanks, Joy. Yeah, risk and uncertainty are probably going to be the biggest pushback that you receive when it comes to a new AI tool. There are so many great resources available regarding responsibly and ethically implementing AI in a legal practice, from ALA resources to ABA resources and a lot of state bars in between. Those resources are out there. So go ahead and get ahead of those risk, ethics, and responsibility questions and find out, what other questions are people going to ask? How have we already tried using the tool? What are people excited about when it comes to using AI? And then benchmark them against what we're seeing across the industry. That 92% of mid-sized law firms are already using AI in some way, with 51% using it widely, right? Like, are we part of that 51%? Because we should probably hop on board safely, ethically, and responsibly, right? So those questions can be answered, but risk and uncertainty is probably the biggest pushback that folks will receive.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. And we are out of time, so I'm going to let you say any final remarks that you have and then send everyone on their day.
Perfect. Joy, thank you so much for having me. And another huge thank you to the ALA. This is one of my favorite conversations with my favorite group of people. So I'm just stoked to be here. And I hope everybody stays warm and has a happy holiday season ahead. And good luck with 2026 planning and goals.